Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today on summer programs in adolescent development. My name is Andrew Fuligni, and I am a member of the Center for the Developing Adolescent, as well as a professor in psychology and psychiatry at UCLA. We at the Center for the Developing Adolescent aim to collaborate with leading researchers, practitioners, and other innovators in the field of adolescent development in order to drive better and bolder ideas on how to harness what we see and what the science tells us about the enormous potential of adolescence. We distill and we share the most up-to-date developmental science, and we try to shine a light on leading voices in the field to transform how we as a society and our communities view, serve, and value young people. And we aim to do so with an equity lens, working to inform equitable policies, programs, and practices based upon that science. So today we're very excited to put together this webinar because, as unfortunately we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has been posing major challenges to youth development over the last several months and will continue to do so to the establishment of summer enrichment programs for adolescents. And what's important for us and for all of you, I'm sure, who are here today, as you know, these programs are more than just something to do for adolescents while school is out. They provide critical opportunities for adolescents to explore, to connect with one another, and to contribute to their communities, opportunities that are essential to healthy adolescent development, particularly as these youth have spent months outside of a classroom, and even more so, particularly for young people today who face economic, social, and structural biases and discrimination. So today we have an exciting panel of experts in this area who can talk both about the importance of these programs for youth development, as well as how practitioners and parents can think about how to create quality summer opportunities and programs for youth from diverse backgrounds. We're very happy to have Dr. Valerie Adams-Bass, who is Assistant Professor of Education at the Curry School of Education and Human Development at the University of Virginia. Excuse me. We have Aaron Dworkin, who is the CEO of the National Summer Learning Association. And we also have Sandra Simpkins, Dr. Sandra Simpkins, who is professor in the School of Education at the University of California at Irvine. So the format today is, first, we will hear from the panelists, have a discussion for about 35 or 40 minutes or so. We have a set of questions that we're going to pose to them and that they have prepared to answer. And they will talk amongst themselves to try to discuss some of the issues facing us today. We will have time for questions during the last part of the webinar today at about 12:10 or 12:25. And at that time, you can ask questions by clicking Q&A at the bottom of your screen. I think many of you are probably familiar with this by now by doing a few webinars over the last few months. And if a question comes to your mind while the panel is discussing, please know that we will see them and we will answer them, but we will only answer them at the last part of the discussion. And then the final thing before we start, if you are familiar enough with Zoom and you go to the bottom and find polls, perhaps on your screen it's under more, and then you need to find polls. I am going to click a poll because we want to know who you are and what you do. So the question is very basic. What's your primary interest in this panel discussion? I'm about to launch the polling, and then you can feel free to let us know who you are and why you're joining us today, and that will help us as we sort of go forward with our discussion. Okay, I just launched the polling. All righty, so why don't we just go ahead and get started? I'm going to ask the first question to the panel. Each of them will take about 3 to 4 minutes to respond to the question, in turn, respond to one another, and then they will just sort of go ahead and proceed and have discussion amongst themselves. Okay, our first question is the biggie. It's a meaty one, so I'm not saying you have to answer all of it in 3 minutes, but sort of just to get us warmed up, because we will just talk about it as we go forward. And that is the big one. Why are out-of-school programs so important for positive youth development? Why are they so important now, given the pandemic and after months of school closures and social distancing? And why are they particularly important as adolescents are around the country, as we as a country wrestle with long-standing racial injustice and inequalities that have unfortunately been even more exacerbated by this pandemic? So I'm going to turn to Dr. Adams-Bass, if you'd like to start off.
Wow, 33 minutes is tough, but I'm going to try to do my best. So Out of school time programs are certainly important because they give young people an opportunity to participate in activities in an environment that's non-school like. So they get a chance, particularly for you, to explore, develop relationships, improve relationships, just try different types of hands-on applied learning that our public school system limits because there's such a focus on achieving grades, making test scores. But in an out of school time environment, it's a little bit more informal. They can navigate to the activities that are important and relevant for them. That was probably 60 seconds. And I would also say, in terms of civic engagement, that has really bubbled to the top in light of COVID-19 with the social distancing and the impact that it's been having on Black families and Black communities. Many children who participate in out of school time activities have parents who are considered essential employees. So while they haven't been in school because schools have been closed, but their parents are required to go to work, these out of school time programs give them a space where they can be safe, even in these virtual environments. But what we're learning and coming to understand is that what's being elevated to the top is the idea that there still exists a digital divide, that access to all technology resources that allow that virtual connection is not equal across groups, races, communities, urban and rural, suffer quite a bit from that access. And then lastly, in my probably 30 seconds, I would say when we think about civic engagement, if you look at the long history of assessing and evaluating civic engagement, a lot of that had to do with more like service, more service, more contributing to events and issues that already pre-existed, without as much of a social justice element where young people could really dig into issues that were existent and begin to think about how to change them. So a lot of that has been part of, them, youth of color being not part of a larger conversation around civic engagement because it hadn't really looked at social justice issues and inequity. What we're looking at now because of COVID-19, what we're looking at now in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, in terms of what has happened since George Floyd's death, are young people who are agitated enough to do something and address inequity. So civic engagement allows those young people, particularly Black and brown young people, to be engaged in their communities with issues that are systemic, differently from just maybe going to a food kitchen or soup kitchen and contributing in that way.
Thank you, Dr. Adams-Bass. I particularly appreciate the focus on the tremendous opportunities and skills that these kids have to contribute to our society and the importance that these activities can play. Dr. Simpkins, do you want to take a turn?
Thanks, Andrew. And I'd like to thank you and the Center for the Developing Adolescent for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm very excited to be here today. When I was thinking about this question, so as Valerie had mentioned, that organized after-school activities during the school year and summer play these protective functions in that they help shelter youth, but then they also serve promotive functions, right? Which is that they can help with academic achievement, but they actually really shine when you think about all the other ways that organized activities help youth with social emotional learning, with community, right? Engagement and service. And there actually is a long history when you look at the after-school literature on thinking about youth participation, organized, especially community-based activities, and their civic engagement. But I would completely agree with Valerie that I think much of it is focused on volunteering, also effect on voting, or those kinds of things. And I think now, after school, the field, the programs, the leaders there have an opportunity to be champions for these kids and to really help them achieve things, projects that matter to them, right? And so, but really it's one thing that's really important to the after school field is following youth lead and youth voice. And so I think there is an opportunity here for those adults and those staff to really help support the youth in what matters to them and really make a difference in the community, which is one way, Andrew, when you asked about how do programs matter now, I think they really could, they matter greatly. And I think there's an opportunity here that they could seize to really support youth in this important time. I also agree that I think the disparities in access to technology, to internet service, all those things, that the gaps, learning gaps that existed before are probably, unfortunately, going to be much larger. And I think it behooves the after-school field to make these resources as much as they can freely and openly available, right? And there are still going to be limits to that, but oftentimes low-income families can't afford many of the opportunities that are there for after school. And now that it is online, in some ways that opens up opportunities, right? That you can learn about museums you may not be able to travel to, and you can learn about some of these things that were not available before. I also think when you look at the history of organized after-school activities in our country, one thing that's really interesting is its flexibility, which now can really be an asset. So in previous times of war, actually, organized after-school activities change their function in families' lives and the focus of the activities the children did there to help them cope with what was going on. And so, again, after-school activities have the opportunity here to really help youth, help communities deal with the current historical context. And the other thing that I would mention is that in some of our work, we've looked at how activities are a place that can bridge divides. And so it can help create relationships, friendships, connections among people that oftentimes don't happen in school because of barriers and the structure of school. And so this is really, it's another opportunity for, I think, after school to play right now.
Great, Sandy. And just to sort of flag some themes that are emerging, the importance of meaning and mattering and what these opportunities can do for youth. Dr. Adams-Bass mentioned the digital divide and the potential flexibility of programs that can sort of help us to deal with the issues that we're facing. Aaron, would you like to go next?
Sure, and thank you everyone for allowing me to join you. So I'm with an organization called the National Summer Learning Association, been around for more than 25 years, always historically focused on with the research around summer learning loss. And so one thing I'll just say is summer specifically, but now summer has morphed into what Karen Pittman at the Forum Youth Investment said, what is it like when out of school time is all the time? And that's the moment we've been in. But historically, in our opinion, summer has been one of the most inequitable times in education and there's research to show that during the school year, students of different income levels, they're all increasing their learning, but then it's over the summer 3 months when some students with resources have opportunities to go learn and take advantage of the summer months and do wonderful things and keep their education going in new and creative ways, and others don't. And what's happening at the moment we're in is this empathetic aha moment for that inequity and those struggles and those challenges we've all been trying to address, because now with everyone working, 55 million students have been home for 3 months, working parents struggling to balance, how do I keep my job going and get my kids online and all this, and people have been calling us saying, is this what happens over the summer for low-income families especially? And we're saying, yes, this is what, these are things that you haven't been thinking about. And so I want to flag that there's a chance for all of us to bring in new partners and stakeholders into our conversation. A lot of us work on these issues day in, day out, but now there's other folks who we can bring into this fight. And it is an equity issue, of course, and as we're seeing everything come together. I'll just, a couple quick thoughts about why it matters so much, and everybody has said it. And I'll just make this point, and all of you as academics have much more research to back it up, but not all periods of life are equal in terms of the learning that can happen. And when you're an adolescent, and there's a reason, I always joke, if you're 51 and between the ages of 51 and 54, you might learn a few new things, your life might change in different ways, but it may not be as dramatic as what happens to you between the ages of 11 and 14 or 13 to 16. And so the time that we all get to work on is a huge gift to all of us. All the points about flexibility and hands-on learning and experiential learning and team-based and project-based learning, all these things we want students to have the chance to do, have their voice heard, let them take ownership of their own learning. All these things you can't get to necessarily during the school year because there's so many requirements, there's so much structure, and there's so little time. You have that opportunity in after school and the summer. So, ultimately, I say one of the things that's great about working in after school, if you're entrepreneurial in education, and why it's even matters even more now, is in a crisis with limited resources and an increased need, there's a demand on all of us to be hyper creative and hyper collaborative, because there's not enough money or time to go around to support all the good work and the needs that need to be met. But one of the ways I like to talk about how important this moment is, and the work we're all doing, is that summer programs, out of school time programs, and especially those focused on adolescents, it's a time for improvement. It's a time for targeted improvement where you can really focus on what your biggest needs are, but also what your passions are, and work on it. And by the way, not just for young people, but for adults as well. So I think we see a lot of summer programs that double up as professional development. It's a time for innovation, and this moment calls for it. There are so many organizations and programs that started out as summer programs that became national organizations and full-on charter schools and everything else. But if you want to test something out before you scale it and roll it out, the summer is a really good time. And I think we need to be flexible, as we're all trying to be, and come up with some new innovations. It's a time for integration. I think this is one of the best parts about our field, is that everybody wants to work together, but typically they don't have time. And once the school year starts, the train's left the station. But there's a moment, especially in the summer, especially right now, where people are having conversations with unlikely partners. School districts are working with the Parks and Rec and the libraries and the public housing facilities and the summer youth employment, and to be much more coordinated and having conversations that maybe they wanted to do, but they never had the chance to do. And this moment's calling on us to be much more integrative and collaborative. And the last, again, about it is about impact. Because we get to do so much experiential learning with young people, and get them to be put in charge and decide what they want to do. And they say in our field, students vote with their feet. These are not mandatory programs. They're not punishing punitive programs. We want them to come because they want to be there, and we have to make it attractive to them. But this idea that, again, the learning that they're having is immediate and it's lasting. It works for them right now, but 25 years from now, they can look back on that summer, that COVID-19 summer, and what did they get to do, and how did they respond, and what actions were they empowered to take by the adults who cared about them.
Thank you, Aaron. I think your comments really nicely take us on sort of the next part of the conversation, and your points about embracing the challenge, facing the challenges, and trying to think creatively of how to meet the challenges and provide the youth what they need. So to that end, I'd like to open up some conversation amongst you to think about what key elements do we need to be thinking about in terms of as we are trying to provide these opportunities to youth moving forward. What do we need to include in the kinds of opportunities that we're thinking about, and how do we do so, again, to try to ensure an equitable view and providing youth the opportunities to meet the challenges that are facing their communities and country today? Valerie, do you want to start? You guys can respond to each other. So.
Sure. No, I would say I was taking notes.
Yeah.
A couple things that came to mind during the sort of responses and discussion. So two things that I want to sort of say and make sure that we're thinking of as we have this discussion and invite questions and answers is the assets that exist in communities of color, specifically in African American, Black communities, Latino communities, Asian American communities, are often unacknowledged or underutilized when we are able to run traditional after school, out of school time programming. One of the things, in addition to elevating the disparities and inequity that exists in our public school system, and even the funding and opportunities in out of school time, is the resilience of these communities and the ways that we have not been partnering with the people who live in these communities, right? So we have these profiles of poverty or low performance or high crime, but very often we're not looking at what are the assets that exist in these communities. And because people are working from home and have been working from home for the last 2.5, 3 months, and we have many of the parents of these young people going to work because they fall into the essential category, or some who have been laid off, that brings another level of concern. But with that, there's an opportunity to see what assets exist in this community and how can we collaborate. So the comment about new and innovative collaborations should also include, the parents, the houses of worship, the grandparents, those fictive kinships that exist in these communities that we often don't think about because we're having our face-to-face engagement with these young people. So I think we need to think about that as we have this conversation about what will the summer look like. We know that there are states that have opened up and already COVID is going back up. So there could be those of us who are planning, or some practitioners who are planning summer programming, that's going to have to readjust again. So I wanted to bring that up. And then another important part of the conversation related to that, when I think about the work with young people, I think about Hart's ladder of youth participation, and really looking at those 8 rungs and really recognizing that oftentimes for low income or youth of color, Black youth, Latino, Asian American youth, particularly those that are coming from Southeast Asian countries who often have lower resources, there's sort of this, tokenism in terms of civic engagement or involvement. It's, hey, we want you to be involved, come and talk with us or tell us what you need, versus what do you think you need? And in this moment where young people are frustrated, developmentally so, right? They've been home, they don't have school, they've not necessarily been able to communicate with their peers, let alone those caring adults who they don't live with. So the frustration that they're experiencing and articulating, as well as the demands, is really developmentally appropriate in many ways. And so how do we harness this moment, as was mentioned, as Aaron mentioned, how do we harness this moment and make sure that those experiences, to your point, Andrew, that those experiences for those of us who are academics become part of that literature that influences policy and influences funding, right? So what they're expressing is not necessarily, many of the young people, is not out of the ordinary. The disruption that we see them demonstrating and demanding, asking for, is not unusual for where they are in terms of developing agency, becoming adults, asking for, lobbying for what they need in a moment when they have not been getting it for a while, but acutely over the last 2.5, 3 months. So we definitely want to think about what are the assets in the communities that typically have a deficit-based profile, and how do we make sure that we are integrating into our research the experience of young people in a developmentally appropriate framework, so that that makes it, one, into policy, but also into the practice of those who are on the front lines working with young people. So those are some things I thought of and kind of scribbled down as I was hearing both Sandra and Aaron provide their responses.
I really appreciate the themes that you guys are hitting in terms of the collaboration, but taking a bottom-up approach to this and focusing on what these communities can bring and offer, and already are doing, and they've solved some of these problems already, and we need to recognize that. Sandy, some of your work in California is with a lot of the work with after-school programs you engage in are with Latino families and immigrant families. Do those themes resonate with some of the work that you've seen going on?
Yeah, completely. I 100% agree with Valerie that it's, I think oftentimes as adults, we have very good intentions. We want to do X, Y, and Z with the kids or help develop these things. And in the after school field, there's always been a focus on safety, right? Sort of the basic needs. I think now psychological safety has to be added to that. And when I was listening to Valerie talk, and when you think about both the physical concerns that students and families have and the psychological concerns that the youth and the family have, we gotta, again, the flexibility of after school, we have to take advantage of that and really focus on those things. What is it that youth and family need? What are their strengths? What do they want to do this summer, right? When you're talking about this summer, what do they want to do? How do they want to take action? What do they want to try? What do they want to lead? And then the adult's role is to scaffold and support that, help mentor that, but it's not necessarily to lead. It's a youth-led thing, right? And then, but if you don't have this physical and psychological safety, then I don't know how much they're going to be able to engage in this. So again, we really, the flexibility of after school can sometimes be an issue, but I think here it's a strength. And what it means is we don't have to follow lesson plans strictly or as strictly as they do during the school day. And so if there's an issue that happens, there's research that shows leaders shouldn't ignore it, and you should stop and address it. And if you're going down this path on this project, and then you turn right and you go this other direction, that's totally fine and that's great. And so I think really we need to get down to basics here, and it needs to be physical, psychological safety. It's really youth voice, youth lead, what matters to them, building on their strengths. And then that basic relationship, that it's harder to build a relationship if you're talking about online programming, but there are tons of online games, different things that you can do, and you need to build the adult youth relationship in order for them to go out on a limb, to try something new, and to build that trust. So.
Yeah, look, I'll just jump in. I have to agree with everybody's points. I think the trauma that we're in right now is so deep and so real, and it has to be acknowledged. And you can't, all these other academic goals, and when you talk to a lot of superintendents, when you say, well, what are your goals for this summer? They say, first, just to make sure all our students are checked in with and are okay and feel connected and cared for. I mean, you know, 40 million people are unemployed right now. More than 100,000 people have passed away, and you know what? And home for a lot of folks is not the best place to be locked into for months at a time. So there's just a lot of trauma, not only for young people but also for the staff. So you know, it's that metaphor we always talk about, you know, put your mask on first before you take care of someone else. And I think we have a lot in our field. We have a lot of young, maybe you're based on your definitions of adolescence, I'm not sure what age you go up to, but you might have young people in their early 20s who are working with, you know, even younger folks, near peer mentors. So just, you know, I think, and there are a lot of resources, people are thinking about it, but we have to focus on that more than ever in this moment. I also think about the relationship base and this whole effort to go online so quickly. Yes, it brought up all the digital divide issues and technology. You have the computer, do you have the internet access? If you're, is it accustomed for English language learners? If you're someone with special needs, young students, you know, that's a different category than we're talking about, have a tremendous difficulty. But I think one thing that they have shown is that it's those programs where it's online, but then it's real world relationships that kind of are supporting the program. You can't just say, everyone join me online at 10 a.m. If there's a staff person who's reaching out to that student, checking in by phone, by maybe, you know, through a Zoom call, but like, let's debrief, let's talk, what do you want to do? How was that for you? You know, we have to keep those relationships going in order to make all this other digital learning going. And a great example of that is Southern New Hampshire University. I always highlight them. They're one of the most effective online colleges with the highest graduation rate of an online program. And part of what they have is they have football fields of call centers where every single student gets a coach who calls them every single week to check in on them on their life. And that's how they've gotten people to stay enrolled, finish their work, and it's this real world relationship. So give you that example. I also think I just want to highlight the need we have in the summer and possibly the fall, because a lot of colleges are not going to bring back students right away, is that we have probably 1 million plus college students in our communities right now. You talk about local assets, Valerie, which I totally agree with you, but we have a lot of wonderful role models and near peer mentors who might be home right now, who want to get involved and be helpful to even younger people. And we all know, if you're an adolescent, you don't want to listen to someone in their 40s or 50s. You want to listen, maybe, you know, someone, you know, one rung above you. If you're in middle school, you care about the college kid or high school student. So we have to take advantage of those leaders that are here. A lot of them want, you know, even if you're on work study, by the way, you know, you can't get paid, but I think there might be, we need to look into this, ways where you could get paid to do your work study program in your community right now, because you can't do that job at your college. So if that program's continuing, so there are resources out there, and connecting it to policy. And a lot of policymakers are really open, and with all these kind of COVID crisis funding bills, there's a lot of discussion about how, you know, what are the tweaks that need to be made to support everyone. And just a phrase I just heard earlier today, it was to say, not to use, someone was recommending, don't use the phrase socially distant, because we are social animals and we need to be socially connected. Just talk about spatially distant. because that's the reality. We want to be connected socially. We don't want to be distant, but we, in a social way, but we need everyone to feel. So, and then this whole, everything about, empowering them, and Valerie's point and your point, Sandra, as well, about students are very well aware of what's going on in the country right now. And they have a lot to say and they have a lot to do, and they should be, again, supported, given whatever tools and resources they need to take action and plan the programs and the discussions they want to have. And I think that's going to be, it's like the guide by the side, as some people like to say, and let them, let's get out of the way and give them a chance. They know what's going on with COVID. They know what's going on with the equity and race issues and bias issues and structural racism in our country. And they have ideas, and then, we need to support them.
One thing, Andrew, if I could ping on to, I know you want us to discuss, if I could ping on some of what Aaron said, is that I think I saw we have some parents here on the call, and I'm a parent of 2 adolescents right now, and this summer is going to be different for them. I don't know how else to say it. It just is. And so but it's also a time for opportunity. So my children are doing something completely different than they've ever typically done in a summer. And it's not going, I won't lie, it's not going 100% smoothly, but it is presenting some new opportunities for them and stretching them in different ways. And so again, I get back to, there are some really serious issues that I think this country needs to face. And we could use this time to seize this opportunity to help make a difference for the adolescents in this country. And talking with adolescents about mentoring younger people, that even, I have a 7th grader is one of my adolescents, and she loves mentoring younger people. So it doesn't even, Aaron mentioned college students as mentors, which is great. And mentoring relationships help the mentor and the mentee, I think, equally. But it's sort of regardless of age, they can build their community, they can mentor younger people. So.
Yes, thanks, Sandy and Andrew. Aaron, thank you for highlighting the tremendous resource we have in terms of the young people of the sort of the college age, or from the 18 to 25 age, whom we consider to be still adolescents and transitioning into adults. But they serve a critically important function, and they too are seeking opportunities to find meaning and purpose and to contribute. And as to Valerie's point, many of local Black Lives Matter chapters have a long history of youth groups in which they work with them and combine intergenerational groups. So it's about noon. We have about 10 more minutes before we're going to turn it over to some Q&A. There's some great ideas about themes, about important elements to keep in mind as we're thinking about what to move forward with. But I maybe wanted to spend these 10 minutes to ask you, what ideas do you have or have you seen that really are interesting ways to deal with the issues we're facing right now in terms of giving youth opportunities and recognizing the digital divide? And so, maybe you can offer 1 or 2 things that you've seen that our audience might want to sort of take home with them to try to explore for themselves that you think are promising.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to get a 2-for-1 in here. But one of the things that I saw and thought was fantastic, I was in another conversation about doing positive youth development at a distance, and we had a small business owner on that panel. So going back to Aaron's conversation about partnerships, we're talking about, the loss of small businesses. We're talking about being innovative in our partnerships. And for sure, we certainly should be knocking on the door of larger corporations who have the resources and foundations to support these efforts. But then thinking about the small business owner who works in that community, is probably often in the community working in their store, they have an idea about what's going on in that community, for good, for bad, for better, for worse. And so thinking about who are the people in your neighborhood. Sesame Street is my favorite show still. So who are the people in your neighborhood? Who are the businesses in your neighborhood? Could they be a partner with those young people that some people still may consider adolescents a nuisance? Could they be a partner or a place for that internship or that work study for that college age student right now? I like Aaron's idea because it varies from state to state, and it may take a little more paperwork, but there are cases where students can work in their home community and receive their work study. It's not as easy as when you can just walk on campus or into the local community, but having run a freedom school with young people from different places, we were able to secure some state level work study funding in the past. So that is one thing to explore, which also helps those young people who need the resources and need something to do. So this idea, what excites me and something to think about is, who are the people in your neighborhood? Do that community mapping. See who's starting to open up their store. Have a conversation with them. I think that that is, again, one of those underutilized assets that we don't think about because they're small businesses, but who could be a dynamic partner with the young people as well as with us researchers who are trying to do a better job or are doing a good job right now of working with them. Definitely don't forget. And this was a bookstore owner, so she was perfect, you know, but really thinking about what's going on. And one thing I might add, what I loved about her bookstore, she had experience working with young people, but as we experienced the protests and some of the looting here in Philadelphia, you know, many of the stores have boarded up. I said, I need to invest in some 2x4s, get some stock in that and plywood, but her store was never boarded up. And I'm sure that's because she's been partnering with that community. And so, I think that's something not to, definitely don't overlook those small businesses, those churches, those organizations in your community, and have a conversation. Be a partner. Don't necessarily go in dictating how this relationship is going to run.
Other things you've seen, Aaron, maybe in some of your calls and conversations nationally, what kinds of things are starting to bubble up that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of resources right now, and we have a national task force called Summer and Continuing Task Force with 25 national groups trying to collect all their different expertise and examples to share out with people. So we have a lot. We've been doing webinars ourselves every week. If you go to summerlearning.org, look up our webinars. There's a lot of model programs and resources we've been highlighting every week. But I'll just say, I think people have been asking me, well, if I'm so limited now and I can't go to my program and things have been canceled, what can I do? And what should I try and get out of this summer? And so we have a kind of a quick way of responding, and I'll just share a couple examples that might be useful. So the first is, we say 4 things, try and get healthy. And that can be emotionally, also physically healthy. So there's so many resources. Use this summer to be physically active. The NBA has created a curriculum called NBA at Home that's free for folks. Every sports team is doing stuff. So I would just figure that out. Up to Us Sports is a great program for anyone who's running a program. They place trauma-informed coaches in programs to use sports as a hook to kind of work with students, and then they're kind of coach mentors. But it's relationship building through sports. So that's a great partner and a good example, and they're working with lots of groups, and they're AmeriCorps funded, so they're free to anybody who needs them. So Up to Us Sports. Another is get ready for school, and we talk about adolescents. Summer by definition is a transition point, and especially for students who now have just finished middle school and about to start high school, there's a lot of nervousness about that. If you're a high school student about to go to college and you're not sure what that looks like. So focusing on them, but either an academic or even something that'll support them academically. And you can't make up for all this lost time all at once. So just pick one thing. If it's your math, it's your literacy, it's your college access understanding. Last 2 is about getting a career skill. And I think Valerie was talking about that through learning about from entrepreneurs in your community. But whatever that looks like, everyone is making themselves available. Apple, I was on a call with them, Apple Computer, they have free curriculum, how to be an app developer. If you had, if that's all you did this summer was learn how to, become a better coder or learn how, you would actually come back to school in the fall with a great skill where you could make a lot of money, and what you do in school connects to your passion and to the real world. And the last thing, I think we've been making this point, but I would say it again, is getting involved. And that's however that looks. And it's, like you said, Sandra, you're saying either be a mentor, be a mentee, take on a leadership role, do service. So use Service America. Mentor.org have all these great resources for young people and families and communities to take advantage of and plug and play opportunities. So again, I'll just say, get healthy, get ready for school, get a skill, get involved. Those are kind of 4 tips I would recommend to folks.
Great, thanks, Aaron. And then, oh, go ahead, Valerie.
If I could just follow up real quick, I know we want to open it up for questions to what Aaron said. There are ways, for the parents who are on this call, there are ways to do that informally and still to improve on math, reading, public speaking, history lessons right now and every day. And I say that, you know, I'm the parent of a 4-year-old who is revolted on learning, but we do it through everyday activities. So and you can do that with teenagers too. So if you're having a conversation about Black Lives Matters, if you are working with young people who live in a community where they feel like they're not impacted, you can go through, you know, a civil rights, you know, conversation with them, and then maybe have them essay. Young people are on top of the digital media. Please believe it. They know what the next media is. And so if you want to have them chronicle your family history or your recipes or work with the community, they can learn that app or put those skills together and still learn. So I think, you know, and certainly there's a hesitation and we know that there's a disparity in performance, but if we make it applied learning while we're home, the same way we try to do in out of school and time environments, that will also help to decrease, you know, that learning disparity and gap that we know exists and probably will widen. So don't just think about, you know, cooking at home, you know, what's the measurement? How do you convert? And it may take a little more on your behalf as a parent, but then they'll be learning, you know, when they can't sit down anymore in front of the Zoom camera, right? So think about doing it in that way. And in terms of getting healthy, you know, making sure that you as an adult are acknowledging how you feel and making sure that you are acknowledging how those young people feel, whether it's trauma, stress, whether it's joy, making sure you are acknowledging that, particularly for those young people who are severely impacted, Black young children who are severely impacted by the repetitive viewing of, you know, the death of George Floyd.
Okay, I think we've lost Valerie's connection a little bit.
Andrew, if I can add a few things.
Yeah, so before you, Sandy, I would like to just invite people. Oh, there you go.
Oh, there she is.
I'm sorry, you blanked out on us briefly, Valerie.
All right, just making sure that we're checking in with those young people and asking them how they're doing, because while we may be connected to Zoom, they're connected in all these social media spaces where they're seeing these traumatic images over and over again. So let's make sure we do those things that Aaron has mentioned and so wonderfully articulated.
I think the point that you two have highlighted of keeping in mind that this is a traumatic experience for these kids, and particularly for the kids from communities of color who've experienced trauma for long periods of time. Sandy, before you answer the question, I just want to offer, before you add your point, I want to invite people to start entering questions on the Q&A, not the chat, but use the Q&A. And while Sandy is offering her comments, then we'll see what we can offer to the group from the questions. Sandy?
Yeah, I was just going to add that in addition to what Aaron and Valerie said, I think connection is really important, right? So making sure that even if they're still on technology, because that's the way many of them are connected, that they're connecting to their friends, they're connecting to the community. And whether that can be in person or it still needs to be, you know, virtually connecting, that adolescents are very much social beings and it helps them to connect with others. And then the other thing I was going to say is, and also a purpose, right? That takes some time, whether you're, I know we have staff, like activity staff on the call, we have parents. Take some time to figure out what is it your adolescent is interested in? What are they passionate about? And are there ways, they may be different than a typical summer, but are there ways that they can engage in that this summer? And it could be, like Valerie said, through family projects, through family activities, through, you know, educating yourself. If you're not, you know, depending on what community you live in, you could still educate yourself on all the issues that are going on, and then start to have those conversations with your adolescents in your program or in your family about what are some ways, what are some things you can do that your adolescent can do, and how can you help support them? Or what are some ways that you could engage in these things as a family as well, and start thinking about how to connect. And then pinging on what Aaron said, I think partnerships are going to be key. And one of the things we do here at UCI is we have a Center for After School and Summer Excellence. We have undergraduate classes where the students normally work in after school programs with the youth, which they haven't been able to do. But what we've done is then had the students help create resources. Like, how do you create these games, right? How does an adult, the college student, help develop a relationship with a middle schooler online, right? And so we've tried to think creatively, how can we help build resources and sort of improve the quality of what's already happening out there in after school.
Thank you, Sandy. Again, I'd like to invite the audience, if they wish, to offer a question. So there is a question that's posed that really gets to the question of the digital divide that I think Valerie is talking about. What can we do with the fact that many thousands of students in urban school districts still do not have access to laptops and remote devices? How does this reality add to the challenge of creating meaningful out-of-school experiences?
Yeah, so I think Aaron may be able to answer this too, not to put you on the spot, but I want to thank you for that question. Thinking about media and young people is dear to me. So a few things I want to encourage, in addition to sort of putting the pressure on those school districts, is to look at the corporate organizations that are in your community, to partner with organizations, whether it's your school district, whether it's your out-of-school time provider, and ask those businesses, not just the technology-based businesses like a Verizon or AT&T, but oftentimes businesses have old technology that's just sitting around. And old meaning 3 years, 3 years old, and they have new computers coming up. They have old mobile data, MiFi, mobile web networks sitting around that they're not using, they haven't donated. And right now we are living day to day and trying to figure out what's going on. So I think that is a great place, in addition to maybe contacting those corporations, to see if they can partner with the school district or a local organization to donate that equipment to those schools. Another thing that I like to talk about, we definitely want to elevate and think about navigating change and pushing for change around this digital divide. But for those of us who are not 16, 17, and 18, we use snail mail. We used, old-fashioned ways of connecting. So while they may not be quick right now, we're not doing too much, and it probably wouldn't hurt as long as we're well protected to walk to the post office. Yes, there still is going to be a divide. It doesn't address that, but I think in this moment where we may not be able to get that technology into the hands of those families and those children, continue to advocate and push for that. But we have to be innovative in thinking about what are some traditional ways of teaching and learning that are considered outdated and outmoded that we can connect to right now in this moment. Is it possible to have packets sent home? Telephone technology, text messaging back and forth. So you may not have access to a computer, but you have access to a telephone. And in that telephone, you're able to send text messages, group text, and send maybe some, some assignments and things like that. Those things can happen now. So it does not negate the fact that they don't have that technology, but it means, what do we have available that we can get into the hands of these families and children so they can continue to learn? And I think we forget about, there was a time when we went and mailed packets in, when we used the post office versus email. Those things still exist. Let's use them. Let's be innovative and use the old school technology as we put them.
Innovative. And we could even use real hardcover books as something that people could utilize.
Yeah.
I think it's correct. I work with a lot of libraries, so I think Valerie made all the correct points. That there are government institutions that are closed right now. You can't go. That the Parks and Rec has tons of laptops in your neighborhood, boys or girls, that they are happy to lend out to folks. So if you are a family or a program having trouble, this is one issue people get and want to help you with. So there should be resources in your community to help everyone get a device. On top of that, I will say, almost everyone, cell phones are ubiquitous. So there's a lot of kind of stuff you could do still off your phone, and almost everyone, regardless of income level, has has access to a phone, a smartphone usually these days. But beyond all that, I think, again, there are programs, and we should try and figure out how can we not just be dependent online, and that we could do things, again, in spatially distant ways. It's summer. There's a chance to be outside. We don't want everyone locked in. And a lot of parks, there's a great program in Pennsylvania called Teachers in the Parks, where teachers in small groups sit on a blanket and they will go over reading. They have a whiteboard, they have a box of books, and they work with the same students for a few hours, and then they have lunch. And so, if you could do it in a space, in a socially distant, or I'm saying spatially distant way. So I just would harp on that. I also think Valerie keeps making these great points. I just want to give an example to illustrate it about working with your local Chamber of Commerce and your local business community and how helpful they want to be. A lot of them aren't as busy, unfortunately. We feel so busy right now in education. There are a lot of folks who are not as busy as we all are and want to be involved, and if you're giving them a way to be helpful, that they'll take it. But in Charlotte, North Carolina, there's a woman named Dawn Hill who runs the Summer Youth Employment Program. And I think this is an important piece of all our work because it is adolescent experience, and it's what summer learning, summer jobs is summer learning for teenagers. And New York City has a program of 75,000 that they canceled, and the students revolted and said and demanded those jobs. And now people are the business community, people are trying to figure out how to fund it. I mean, it was a funding challenge. In North Carolina, what Dawn did, and National League of Cities is a great resource on this too. And they could also, that's your mayor's office and all the municipalities. But what Dawn did again was, instead of canceling the program, she reached out to all the local businesses and said, hey, I know these students can't come to your workplace, but would you pay for them to get trained up on Microsoft programs and certifications and LinkedIn learning programs where they can get a certification. And then when the time is right, they will have the skills to do some more work with you. And so, and everyone agreed that they took that deal. And that's how 6,000 teenagers are able to now have jobs that are paying them to learn still. And when the time is right to be connected more in person, they'll be able to do that. But also she extended the work past the summer. And she said, all right, well, can we still pay them to work for you in the fall if they can't get these projects done in the summer? And they agreed to that. So we don't need to be limited by the constraints of the past of how we've set ourselves up to do all this work, whether it's core day, after school, summer. Now things are morphing and merging, and there is this real chance, by the way, in the fall, that there will be a uptick in outbreak, and that students will be out of school again for another 2-3 months, from October to December. And already school districts are talking about staggered schedules where you go on Monday and Wednesday, and Tuesday and Thursday you might be off. So there's a lot of fluidity to what structure, things will look like. I think people will have devices, but again, we have to keep reaching out to the partners and think outside the box, and just know whoever you reach out to, they will help you. People want to help you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Aaron. I mean, these are just examples of the creativity and using the local community resources that everyone has been talking about here. Boy, we just need to continue this conversation beyond just this hour that we have here, and we have 8 minutes left. There's so many important things to discuss. We have one question that's been posed. I'm going to pose it right to Sandy. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit, and then I'm going to offer you each to offer one final point before we end. The question really gets to the point that I think Aaron was pointing out, that everyone is experiencing trauma in varying degrees based upon their backgrounds and experiences and where they come from in their communities. And to ask the staff to create programs for youth can be quite challenging because they also are trying to do a lot. So Sandy, the question, I'm going to rephrase it for you because I know you can see the question. What do you think, if a program is developing something for families to do at home, what are the 1 or 2 things that program should include so that they're not overwhelming themselves, the staff, to try to come up with an incredible array of things? But what are the 1 or 2 things you think would be important? And then we'll move on to close.
And I think it's a great question, because I think, unfortunately, compared to like school teachers, the out of school field doesn't have this sort of systematic training and this. So tackling some of these topics, that it's hard for staff, right? It's hard for anybody to talk about some of these topics. So I completely understand, and trying to figure out how to, bridge the digital divide and all these kinds of things. I think coming back again to the basics, that a lot of these youth are hurting. A lot of these youth feel isolated. And a lot of these youth want to contribute and feel like what they do matters. And so in some ways, it's talking to the youth and seeing what is it that you want to do. So I don't have a general thing except for youth-led, getting to know them, supporting them, being there for them, and understanding what is it that they want to do, and then trying to see, are there ways in the community, like also volunteering, doing these different things, that ways that they can do something, that they can read books on the thing that they enjoy, that they can volunteer in the community, something about that, so that they can take action on something that really matters to them.
Thanks, Sandy. I think this sort of really captures one of the main things that's coming from this group, is that beyond just the activity itself, we really are talking about providing youth the opportunity to make a difference, to contribute, to connect to their community. And it's the responsibility of families and community, not just families and not just program developers, but our communities, to do this now and as we move forward in the future. And I will say, as a scientist, there's science behind all of this. Science strongly supports all of these things that people are recommending. So Aaron, did you want to, I see you clicked off, we got 5 minutes. I was going to offer everyone, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer everyone to sort of offer one final point for a minute or two before we close. I think Aaron had clicked his mic off first, so I'll let you go first. Aaron, what's the one takeaway you think people should have after this? There are about 30 takeaways that we can develop further, but I'm going to ask you.
There's a lot of takeaways. I'll try to be fast. I think on all questions of technology, let's defer to the youth. They know more. They're more tech savvy than all of us. So whatever the questions we're trying to figure out, let's ask them and let them guide us. They know way more than any of us on this call. On top of that, I think this is also a political moment. And even though some of the young people we're talking about may not be able to vote, there's a big election coming up. And not just at the federal level. A lot of the changes we're talking about need to happen in the neighborhoods and that they live in, and you gaining power by voting, and who's on your city council, and who appoints the head police chief, and who is the mayor, and how do those people, and what young people can learn a lot right now and get involved. If they want to see change, even if they're not able to vote, they can register people to vote. They can canvass for folks. They can find people who represent their causes and issues, and they can really get involved. And now is a perfect time. And I think it's going to be going forward. And by the way, you could also, there's a Bloomberg Philanthropies is running a program to train young people on how to be contact tracers on the COVID issue. So when you're trying to figure out where someone's been, and that's a job, but it also is a leadership response and a service response to what's going on. So I think there's just a lot of ways to tackle the moment, and we just got to highlight those paths and connect dots and let them follow where they want to go.
Sandy, do you want to go next?
I was going to let Valerie go because I feel like I already said mine.
Okay, you said yours already. Okay, Valerie, why don't you bring us home?
Yeah, so I want to say a couple things. And I think at this point, I'm speaking to the practitioners and to the researchers. And so what I will say to you is, practitioners, document what you are doing with the young people, your community partners. It may be a different kind of evaluation than what you're used to, even if you're just taking pictures right now, audio recording, because there's going to come a time where you're going to need to share with your funders what you were doing with these young people in this moment. Doesn't seem important, but please do that. To our researchers, there have been people like, I always reference Sean Ginneray and Connie Flanagan, who've been working with Black youth. Connie worked with young people in South Africa for a while to understand how they become civically engaged and also how that impacts their academic engagements. So what I want to encourage you to do, if you haven't been looking at that work, is to go look at those scholars who've been doing this work, look at what they know works and the recommendations they have for next steps. This is a moment with additional funding coming out for COVID-19 and the impact, the trauma, where you can learn from the scholars who've been doing this work versus saying, where do we go? I don't know where to start. There are those who've been doing this work. And lastly, SRCD just put out Pathways to Civic Engagement with Youth of Color, an awesome manuscript or monograph that talks about an ecological model that values how young people of color get involved in their community? How do we document that? How do we do that research? How do we partner? So if you're going to be doing this work, if you're excited about the opportunity, this is the time to do a better job of capturing what happens in these communities and using that data and that information to impact policy, so that next time we're talking about career readiness in school and achievement gaps in children of color, Black and brown children, immigrants, that we have a more robust data set to push back and encourage policymakers and those who are voting and who we voted into office.
Thank you, Valerie. That's just, I shouldn't say anything because you've ended it perfectly, because there is science behind all of this, and this is a moment. And it's not just a single moment. These moments are going to be continuing on into the future, not just the summer, but also into the fall. We'd like to thank you, panelists, for giving your time to be on yet another Zoom kind of event, but we really appreciate your time and your expertise and the work that you're doing for youth. We'd like to thank the attendees, many of whom are out there actively as researchers or as community members or parents who care deeply about giving the youth the opportunities that they need to get in order to develop their potential and to take advantage of the tremendous impact that they can have upon our communities and our society. So thank you to all of you. We wish you the best. Please, everyone, stay healthy, and please continue the conversation. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for
Bye-bye.
having me.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Take care.